When King Robert Baratheon rode to Winterfell that summer, everything changed. The North had expected a royal visit, one full of feasts, laughter, and old memories, but no one thought the king would make such a strange request. "I want Robb to come back with me to King's Landing," Robert said bluntly after 2 cups of wine. "I'll raise him like a son, like a brother to Joffrey." Eddard Stark frowned, quiet for a long moment. "Why, Robert?" "Because I need you beside me," Robert said. "And I can see you won't come if I ask. But your boy, he can be the tie between us. The North and the South. Joffrey needs a friend, and I need something of yours in my halls." "Something honest," Catelyn had protested. "He is our heir," but Robert smiled, half drunk. "He'll be a prince in all but name. I'll raise him with love. And who knows, maybe one day the boy will rule more than just Winterfell." It was madness. But after much debate, and after Ned saw the tired lines on Robert's face, the face of a man broken by years of ruling alone, he finally agreed. Robb, only 12, was sent south with the king. Joffrey was the same age, though sharper-tongued and spoiled beyond reason. At first the boys clashed like fire and ice. Joffrey mocked Robb's northern accent and rough manners, while Robb thought Joffrey arrogant and cruel. But over time, something strange happened. They began to understand each other. In the Red Keep, everything was twisted and dangerous. Varys whispered through the halls like a spider. Littlefinger smiled too much. Cersei watched Robb with a cold, wary eye, while Robert often vanished into wine and women. But through it all, Robb and Joffrey trained together, ate together, and slowly grew close, not as friends exactly, but as something more dangerous, as brothers. Robb taught Joffrey how to fight properly, not with fancy swings and golden armor, but with focus and control. "You don't need to show off," Robb would say. "You just need to win." Joffrey surprisingly listened. He began to admire Robb's discipline. He even stopped bullying the smaller squires, much to everyone's shock. Meanwhile, Robb learned how the South worked, how words could be weapons sharper than swords. He learned to smile when he wanted to scowl, and to lie when the truth would cost too much. Queen Cersei hated it. She saw her son slipping away, laughing at Robb's jokes, copying his way of speaking, trusting him. She whispered to Robert, but the king just grunted, "They're boys. Let them be boys." But boys grow into men. By the time they were 16, Joffrey and Robb were feared in the training yard. Robb was still calm and silent, but deadly. Joffrey, once wild and reckless, had become sharper, still proud but smarter. Together they were a storm waiting to break. Then came the whispers. Some said Joffrey wasn't Robert's true-born son, that he looked too much like Jaime Lannister, that the Queen had been lying for years. Robb heard these rumors from a passing servant and told Joffrey in secret. Joffrey went still. "Do you believe them?" he asked. Robb didn't answer right away. "Then I don't want to." The seed of doubt was planted, and it began to grow. Meanwhile, Ned Stark had come to King's Landing as Robert's hand, bringing Arya and Sansa with him. Seeing Robb again after 4 years was strange. He looked older, harder. He no longer felt like a son of Winterfell, and when Ned saw how close Robb and Joffrey had become, he didn't smile. He worried. "They've made you soft," he told Robb, "or worse, made you one of them." Robb didn't argue. But something in his eyes said he no longer saw the world in black and white. Things moved quickly after that. Jon Arryn died under suspicious circumstances. The court grew restless. Cersei watched everyone like a hawk. And Robert, fat, tired, and reckless, planned to leave for a hunting trip. Before he left, he pulled Robb aside. "Take care of Joffrey," he said. "He listens to you more than to me," Robb nodded. But he could feel the wind changing. The Red Keep had become a nest of vipers, and deep inside he feared something terrible was coming, not just for Joffrey, but for all of them. The day King Robert rode off for his hunting trip, something in the Red Keep changed. It felt colder, even though the sun still shined. Robb stood on the castle balcony, watching the king's banner disappear over the hills. Deep down, he knew it might be the last time he saw Robert alive. Inside the keep, Queen Cersei moved like a shadow, quiet but dangerous. She had never accepted Robb's place in her home. To her, he was still the wolf among lions, a Stark who didn't belong. That evening, as Robb and Joffrey trained in the yard, Sir Jaime Lannister watched from a distance. Robb could feel the lion's golden eyes on his back. Joffrey, still catching his breath, spat to the side. "He hates that I like you," Joffrey muttered. Robb turned to him. "He doesn't like anyone but himself," Joffrey chuckled. "He used to tell me to stay away from you. Now he just stares." Their bond had grown stronger than even they realized. Joffrey, raised to think he was a future king, now often said if he became king, not when. He had begun asking questions that were never asked aloud in the Red Keep. "Do you ever wonder who you are, really?" he had once asked Robb in the middle of the night. "Not just a name, but where you come from." Robb had replied, "I know who I am, but I don't know what I'll become." The next day, chaos struck the court. Robert was dying. A hunting wound, they said. A wild boar had gored him. But whispers told a different story. That the wine had been too strong, the guards too slow, and that someone had planned it all. Ned Stark stood beside the king's bed, listening to Robert's final words. "Don't let the Lannisters win," Robert groaned. "Promise me." "Joffrey doesn't sit the throne if he's not mine." Ned nodded, heart heavy. But when he looked into the king's pale face, he saw fear, not for himself, but for the realm. Later that night, Ned wrote a letter, sealing the truth, that Joffrey had no right to the throne, that the next true heir was Stannis Baratheon, but he hesitated to send it because he had seen something over the past few years. Joffrey had changed. Under Robb's influence, he was no longer the same cruel boy who once cut a butcher's son's face for fun. He listened now, he thought. He even protected Sansa from his mother's sharp tongue, once telling Cersei, "She's to be my queen. You'll treat her with respect. Could a false king still be a good king?" That same night, Cersei moved quickly. She found the letter. She burned it. She summoned the gold cloaks, promising them gold and power if they sided with her. When Ned confronted her, she didn't deny anything. "You let a Stark grow up in my home. You turned my son against me," she hissed. "Now you'll see what that costs." Ned sent a warning to Robb, but it came too late. The next morning, the throne room turned into a battlefield. Ned arrived with his guards, believing the city watch would back him. But Janos Slynt betrayed him. The swords turned on his men. Robb and Joffrey stood at the center of it all. When Sir Barristan moved to protect Joffrey, Cersei shouted, "He's no king! He's a lie!" Joffrey looked around, stunned. Robb grabbed his arm. "We have to run now." "No," Joffrey said, voice shaking. "If I run, they'll say I'm weak. If I fight, they'll say I'm false." "Do you trust me?" Robb asked. Joffrey nodded barely. Then Robb stepped forward, sword drawn. "Stand down!" He yelled to the guards. "This is madness." Cersei's voice echoed sharp as glass. "Kill Lord Stark! Seize the traitor boy from the north!" The guards moved. Robb shoved Joffrey behind him, blocking the first blow. Blades clashed. Screams filled the hall. Ned was caught in the fight, trying to protect both boys. Blood spilled. A Stark guard fell. A Lannister knight screamed in pain. Then Sir Jaime entered the room. He saw Robb and Joffrey standing back to back, defending each other. He paused just for a second. That second was everything. Robb slashed down a guard. Joffrey grabbed a fallen sword and swung wildly. He hit nothing, but it didn't matter. He was fighting. In the chaos, Ned and his sons broke out, escaping into the lower halls. Varys appeared from the shadows, whispering, "You must leave the city, now." Robb looked at Joffrey, covered in blood and breathing hard. "You're not safe here." "Neither are you," Joffrey replied, but they both knew something had been broken in the Red Keep, and it could never be fixed. The night air in King's Landing had never smelled so foul. Smoke from burning wagons filled the streets. Screams echoed far off in Flea Bottom, while armored boots marched in every direction. The Red Keep was no longer a home. It was a cage closing around them. Robb Stark and Joffrey Baratheon hid in a cold, damp cellar below the kitchens, their swords still wet with blood. Ned Stark had been separated from them during the chaos, last seen pulled away by gold cloaks loyal to Littlefinger. Robb had tried to reach him, but there were too many. Now every Lannister banner in the city was flying high. "She'll name me king," Joffrey said bitterly, pressing a cloth to a cut on his arm. She'll put me on the throne just to save face. Even if she knows the truth. Robb leaned against the stone wall, breathing hard. That's what scares me. You'll be her puppet, or worse, her shield. I'm no puppet. She poisoned your father's last words. She'll poison your rule too. Joffrey looked away, jaw clenched. Then I won't let her rule through me. It sounded noble, brave even. But Robb could see the fear in Joffrey's eyes. He was just a boy raised to believe he was meant to wear a crown, only to now learn that crown came with thorns sharper than any sword. A whisper of silk came from the darkness. Varys emerged from the shadows like a ghost, silent as ever. His round face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "You've made quite a mess," he said. Robb stood up, sword raised. "Speak clearly, Spider. Whose side are you on?" Varys smiled faintly. "The side of the realm. And right now, the realm is burning because 2 wolves are loose in a den of lions." "I'm no wolf," Joffrey said quietly. "But you are," Varys replied, looking him dead in the eye. "Raised in a den that was never meant to be yours. You see, Joffrey, it's not just your crown in danger. It's your life. Your mother would kill you before letting you turn against her." Joffrey froze. "She wouldn't." "She already tried," Varys interrupted. "What do you think this coup was? She planned to either kill Lord Stark and claim your crown, or have him executed for treason. Either way, you serve her story." Robb stepped closer. "And what's your plan?" Varys sighed. "Escape, quietly. I have a ship waiting in the harbor. You both leave tonight. One goes north, the other across the narrow sea. If you stay here, you die." Robb looked at Joffrey. "We can go. You don't have to be part of this anymore." But Joffrey shook his head. "If I run now, I'm finished. The people will never respect me. The crown will be lost forever." "You're not even the rightful heir," Robb said, not cruelly, but honestly. "Do you still want the throne, knowing you were born of incest?" Silence filled the cellar. Joffrey didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "I want to be better than them." Robb raised an eyebrow. "Then prove it." That night, dressed in stolen cloaks and hoods, Robb and Joffrey moved through the city with Varys leading the way. But they didn't head to the harbor. They headed for the Sept of Baelor. At the steps of the great cathedral, hundreds of common folk had gathered. News of Robert's death had already spread. People whispered of betrayal, of war, of fire coming from the west. Joffrey stepped forward, pulling off his hood. Gasps echoed through the crowd. "I am Joffrey Baratheon," he shouted, loud and clear. "Son of King Robert. And I will not hide," the crowd murmured, shocked. "I won't sit on the throne with blood and lies. My mother has betrayed this city. She murdered your king. She tried to kill my brother. She tried to kill me." Robb stood beside him, ready to defend him with steel if needed. "I ask for justice," Joffrey shouted. "Not just for my father, but for this realm. I ask the people of King's Landing to choose who they will follow, the lion or the crown." For a moment no one spoke. Then someone in the crowd shouted, "Long live the king!" Another followed, "Long live Joffrey!" Robb whispered, "You just painted a target on your back." "I'd rather die as a man than live as her pet," Joffrey muttered. Back at the Red Keep, Cersei screamed when she heard. Jaime punched a wall. The Lannisters had lost control, not to war, not to rebels, but to their own blood. That night, as the bells of the Sept rang long and loud, Robb and Joffrey didn't sleep, because they knew war was no longer coming. It had already begun. The bells of the Sept still rang at dawn, but their sound no longer brought peace. It was the sound of rebellion, and Cersei Lannister heard it loudest of all. From her chambers in the Red Keep, she watched the smoke rise from the city and clutched a goblet of wine so tightly her knuckles turned white. "He's turned the people against us," she whispered. "My own son?" Jaime leaned against the wall, armor still blood-stained. "You never should have let Robb Stark near him. You turned a lion into a mutt. He was mine," she hissed. "And now he thinks like a Stark. He acts like one. I gave birth to a king. And now I have a traitor." She slammed the goblet down, wine splashing across the floor. "Then we cut the wolf out of him." Meanwhile, in the Sept of Baelor, Robb and Joffrey were no longer just boys. They were symbols. The people brought bread, blankets, and even weapons. A few old knights pledged loyalty. One ex-guard of the city watch handed Joffrey his cloak, swearing it was for the true son of Robert. Joffrey looked down at the man, stunned. "I didn't expect them to follow me." "They don't follow you," Robb said. "They follow the truth. And they're tired of Lannister lies, but truth alone wasn't enough. They had no army, no gold, no allies, until the Raven came, a small, tired bird with a scroll tied to its leg. Robb opened it with stained fingers and read the words that made his heart twist. "Winterfell stands with the blood of Stark. We march." It was signed by Catelyn Stark and Greatjon Umber, who had rallied northern banners upon hearing rumors that Robb was in danger. The North was coming, and not alone, another letter followed. This one from Renly Baratheon, Robert's youngest brother. "Joffrey has no claim, but if he sides with me, I will consider his life spared. Stark's support would guarantee it." Robb handed the letter to Joffrey. "Renly wants the throne." "He's not wrong," Joffrey muttered. "I'm not Robert's son." "You could give him the crown," Robb said carefully. "Step aside, live." But Joffrey's pride flared. "And let him rule over a lie? Let Cersei win?" He stood up, eyes hard. "No, if I die a king. But I won't be remembered as a coward." Robb stared at him. This was no longer the boy who once mocked squires and paraded in golden armor. This was someone else, someone hardened by betrayal and blood. That night, Cersei made her move. She sent assassins dressed as gold cloaks. 4 of them entered the sept quietly, weapons hidden under their cloaks. They offered bread and water to the guards outside, then slit their throats. Inside, Robb and Joffrey were asleep, unaware. The first blade swung for Joffrey's throat, but Robb woke first. Steel met steel in a flash of sparks. Robb blocked the strike just in time, grabbing the assassin and throwing him into a stone pillar. Another man charged, blade raised, but Joffrey rolled off the bed, snatched a dagger, and stabbed wildly. Blood sprayed the floor. Screams echoed through the sept. More guards ran in. The fight was short, messy, and brutal. When it was over, 2 assassins lay dead. The other 2 had escaped. Robb was bleeding from the shoulder. Joffrey had a gash across his cheek. But they were alive. Varys arrived within the hour. "Cersei's hand," he confirmed. "She won't stop. Next time, it won't be 4 men. It'll be 400. Robb looked at Joffrey. "We need to leave the city." Joffrey nodded, breathing hard. "I'll go north. I want to see Winterfell. I want to see real men who don't stab boys in their sleep. And you'll be safe there," Varys added. "For a while?" "What about the crown?" Joffrey asked. Robb shrugged. "Let Renly have it. Let Cersei burn it. It's not worth dying over." Joffrey stared at the throne in the distance, its sharp edges barely visible through the open window. "No," he said. "But maybe. One day I'll come back for it, when I've earned it." That night, disguised once more, Robb and Joffrey escaped through a hidden tunnel beneath the sept. Varys led them halfway, then vanished into the darkness. At the city's edge, a black horse waited for each of them. Joffrey turned to Robb and said, "You saved me more times than I can count." "You would have done the same," Robb replied. Joffrey smirked. "I would have tried." Then, without another word, they rode into the night, and behind them King's Landing began to burn. The North welcomed them not with songs or banners, but with silence and cold. As Robb and Joffrey rode through the gates of Winterfell, the wind bit through their cloaks. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, settling on Joffrey's golden hair like ash on a battlefield. The walls of the Stark stronghold loomed ahead, tall, dark, and grim, and for the first time in his life, Joffrey felt truly small. The courtyard was filled with men, northern bannermen, household guards, and faces Robb hadn't seen since he was 12. At the front stood Catelyn Stark, her face unreadable, her eyes locked on Joffrey. Robb dismounted first. "Mother," he said, voice low. She stepped forward and embraced him tightly. But when her eyes shifted to the boy beside him, the boy born of the woman who had tried to kill her husband, her warmth faded like steam on ice. Joffrey lowered his hood. "Lady Stark," he said softly, "thank you for allowing me here." "You shouldn't be here," she replied coldly. "But my son says you're not the same boy who left the Red Keep. I'll trust him, for now." The soldiers behind her watched in silence. Some gripped their swords. One muttered, "That's the Lannister brat." Another, "He's got more lion than stag in him." Robb turned, his voice sharp. "He's under my protection. Anyone who raises steel to him raises it to me." It was enough for now, inside Winterfell. Joffrey was given a simple room in the eastern tower. No silks, no golden goblets, no servants trained to bow every time he blinked. He cleaned his own wounds. He poured his own water. At first, he hated it, but slowly it began to change him. He walked the walls in the early mornings, watching the guards train. He listened when Lord Umber spoke of war tactics. He helped in the stables without being asked. The stable master, a grizzled old man missing 2 teeth, muttered, "He don't whine like a lion," and offered him a mug of bitter beer. Joffrey choked on the first sip. "Better than that fancy wine you lot drown in down south?" The old man laughed. Even Arya, who hated him with a burning fury, began to leave him alone. "You're not worth stabbing anymore," she said once, tossing her wooden sword aside. Sansa, however, remained distant. She still remembered the Joffrey who had smiled while her friend Micah died. The boy who had called for her father's head. The boy who promised her a crown and gave her shame. "I don't care how much Robb trusts you," she said sharply one afternoon. "You'll never be my king," Joffrey nodded. "I don't deserve to be." It caught her off guard. She left without another word. Time passed, and the north hardened Joffrey like stone beneath snow. The lion cub had no choice but to grow fangs of his own. But news travelled fast, even through snow. From the south came whispers of Renly Baratheon's coronation. He had claimed the Iron Throne, calling Joffrey a pretender and Ned Stark a traitor. The Lannisters had declared open war. Cersei ruled King's Landing in her son's name, or rather in his absence. Worse still, Stannis had landed in Dragonstone. The Baratheon brothers had begun to turn on each other. The realm was breaking apart. In the great hall of Winterfell, a war council was held. Robb sat at the head, flanked by Catelyn and the Greatjon. Joffrey stood to the side, listening. "Renly will not rest until the north bends the knee," said Lord Karstark. "And Cersei, she'll bleed this land dry. We need a king," said the Greatjon, slamming his fist on the wooden table. "Not just a boy who escaped the Red Keep with a Lannister pet at his side." The room fell into tense silence. Joffrey looked up, his face pale but firm. He didn't speak. "Not yet." Robb stood slowly, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "If Joffrey were still the boy he used to be, I'd agree with you. But he stood with me against the Lannisters. He risked his life protecting my father. And he turned the people of King's Landing against their own queen. You call that courage?" Spat Karstark. "He fled like a coward, letting Renly take the throne he once claimed." "He gave up the throne," Robb snapped, "to stop more blood from spilling. That's not weakness, that's strength." Catelyn raised a hand. "Enough. This is not a time for insults. It's a time for decisions." All eyes turned to her. "We must face a simple truth," she continued. "The realm is broken. 3 kings now fight for power. Renly, Stannis, and Joffrey's name still used by Cersei. But the north, we have no king." "Not yet," the Greatjon stood again. "Then I say we crown one. The south has bled us long enough. Let the wolf rise." He drew his sword and pointed it at Robb. "There sits the only man who has fought with honor, who has led without fear. I don't care if he's 16. I don't care if he's never sat on a throne. He is Ned Stark's son, and he has my sword." One by one, other lords followed. "What's Owen?" Galbart Glover, the Manderleys, all drawing blades and chanting, "The King in the North. The King in the North." Robb looked stunned. "I didn't ask for this." Catelyn gripped his arm. "Neither did your father. But it's your burden now." In the corner, Joffrey watched it all. A boy who once dreamed of sitting the Iron Throne, now watching another be crowned. He turned to leave quietly, but Robb's voice stopped him. "Joffrey." The room fell silent again. Robb stepped forward and raised his hand. "He is no longer my rival. He is my brother. He gave up a crown for peace. So I name him my ward and my shield. He rides under the wolf banner now." Joffrey's eyes widened. You trust me that much?" "I've seen who you are when no one's watching," Robb replied. "And I'd rather ride into war with you at my side than half the lords here." It wasn't a title. It wasn't a crown. But it was something Joffrey had never had before. Real loyalty. That night, the fires burned high in Winterfell's halls. Men drank, sang, and shouted King in the North until their voices cracked. Robb sat at the head, a crown of iron and weirwood newly forged, his eyes already heavy with the weight of war. Joffrey stayed by his side, silent. No gold, no crown. Just a boy from the south, trying to be better than the man he was raised to be. But outside Winterfell, the snows fell harder, because war was still coming, and far to the south. Cersei Lannister was already preparing her next move. A raven sent to Tywin, a quiet deal whispered to the Freys, and a list of names to be burned by fire. And at the top of that list, Robb Stark, and her traitor son. The North had never felt more alive, and never more in danger. Robb Stark now wore the crown of the North, and with it came a storm of expectations. Every morning, the lords demanded answers. Every night, the war maps grew more complicated. Scouts reported that Renly was gathering forces in the Reach. Stannis held Dragonstone like a blade drawn, and Cersei's grip on King's Landing was tightening with Tywin's gold and steel behind her. But one thing became clear. Robb would have to march south. If we don't strike, we wait for death at our gates, Robb said, pacing in the great hall. Renly wants us to kneel, and Cersei wants us dead. The only way we survive is if we choose our battlefield, not wait for it to find us. Catelyn stared into the fire. Every road south is soaked in blood. Your father once walked it. He never returned, Robb nodded. Then I'll return with his justice. Beside him, Joffrey stood silently, armored in plain northern steel. No lions on his chest, no crown on his head, just a direwolf stitched into dark leather. Yet his presence at Robb's side turned heads everywhere he went. Some still didn't trust him, especially the northern lords, who had buried family under Lannister steel. But others had seen him bleed beside Robb, train with northern men, and ride into cold patrols without complaint. Slowly, the whispers of Lannister spy had quieted, replaced by uncertain respect, but trust. In the Game of Thrones is as fragile as glass. One morning, a raven came bearing a message sealed with gold. It was from Lord Walder Frey. "I will open the twins to the king in the north," it read, "and offer safe passage to his army. In exchange, I ask that the young king fulfill his father's promise and take one of my daughters as his bride." Robb frowned, reading the letter twice. "I never agreed to marry a Frey." "But Ned did," Catelyn reminded him. "Years ago, when you were just a child. Lord Walder gave your father troops. Now he wants his price." Robb said nothing. His eyes flicked toward Joffrey, who had grown quiet. "You're thinking of someone else," Joffrey said flatly. "Talisa," Robb sighed. "Talisa Maegor, the healer from Volantis, who had stayed in Winterfell to tend the wounded. Fierce, clever, kind. He'd fallen for her without meaning to. But love had never been safe in war. "I can't marry a woman I don't love," Robb muttered. "You can," Joffrey said coldly. "You just don't want to. But this isn't about what you want. Is that wisdom from your mother's lessons?" Robb asked sharp. Joffrey didn't blink. "No, that's wisdom from knowing how people like Walder Frey think. He's not offering peace. He's giving you a test. If you insult him, he'll smile to your face and stab you at his table." Robb's jaw clenched. "Then what would you have me do?" Joffrey paused. "Marry the girl, or break the deal with fire and steel. But don't lie to him. Don't smile and pretend, then turn away. That's how betrayals begin." Robb didn't answer, but his silence said enough. That evening he wrote a reply, vague, political, non-committal, promising nothing, offering respect. Hoping to buy time, he sent it by Raven, and with it unknowingly signed his death sentence. Far to the south, in Harrenhal, Tywin Lannister read the same message. Walder Frey had already sent him a copy. Tywin's smile was thin. "The wolf is in love," he said. "Good. That makes him weak." Cersei leaned over the table, eyes sharp. "You'll let Walder handle it." "Frey is a man of bridges," Tywin replied. "He knows when to burn them." Back in the north, Joffrey began having dreams, cold ones. Dreams of his mother standing in a throne room full of fire, whispering his name while blood pooled at her feet. Dreams of Robert's voice, broken and distant, saying, "You are not mine." One night he woke up in sweat. Talisa had brought herbs to help Robb sleep after a battle wound, and Joffrey asked for some too. She handed him the pouch gently. "Still not used to the cold?" "No," he said. Still not used to peace, but peace was ending. The northern banners were gathering. Wolves from every hill and forest prepared to march. Robb rode with Grey Wind at his side, and Joffrey rode beside him, carrying no sigil of his own. Together they marched south, into a future neither of them would return from unchanged. Behind them, Winterfell faded into the snow. Ahead, the twins waited, and with it, a feast written in blood. The march to the twins was colder than expected, not from the weather, but from the silence in the air. The men sensed something wrong. The closer they came to Lord Walder Frey's halls, the heavier each step felt. Joffrey rode beside Robb in the front ranks, eyes scanning every hilltop, every tree line. The twins stood ahead, like twin corpses made of stone and suspicion. One bridge, two towers, and thousands of eyes watching from within. Lord Walder's message had promised peace, but his tone had held poison. Joffrey leaned toward Robb. "You shouldn't have written him that letter." Robb didn't look at him. "I told him I'd treat with honor." "You gave him a northern riddle when he asked for a southern answer," Joffrey said. "You dishonored him and tried to sweeten the insult with pretty words." "That man doesn't forget." "I know," Robb said quietly. "But if we don't go in, we lose the Riverlands. And if we lose the Riverlands, the war is over. And if we go in, the war might be over anyway," Joffrey replied. "Just not in the way you think." Still, they rode. At the gates of the twins, Robb's party was received with smiles and formal bows. Walder Frey stood waiting, a wrinkled shadow of a man, skin like old parchment and eyes like knives behind drooping lids. "King in the north," he said with a wheeze. "And his line brother." He looked Joffrey up and down. "Still alive, are you?" Joffrey didn't blink. "Unfortunately for some." Frey's smile widened a touch. "Welcome to my hall. Be sure to eat plenty. It might be your last real meal for a while." That night, the hall was dressed in banners, music, and food. Daughters of House Frey moved through the tables, offering bread and salt, the sacred guest rite. Robb accepted it. So did Catelyn. So did Joffrey. But even as the feast began, Joffrey's hand stayed near his sword. He watched everything. Who poured the wine? Which guards stood where? Which men had new armor? Which servants avoided his gaze? There were too many armed Freys, too many smiling Lannisters tucked into the shadows near the back of the hall. He leaned toward Robb. "We need to leave, now." "What are you talking about?" Robb whispered. "They're watching us like we're already ghosts." Robb hesitated. Then the music changed. The band began to play The Rains of Castamere. Joffrey's blood turned cold. "That's a Lannister song." Robb stood slowly, pushing back his chair. Catelyn's eyes widened across the table. She reached for Robb's arm. Too late. The doors slammed shut. Bolts clicked. Crossbows rose from the balconies. Servants drew daggers. Walder Frey stood from his high seat. "The king in the north has broken his promise. But I am not a cruel man, merely a man who doesn't forget insults." Then he raised his hand, but Joffrey moved first. With a shout, he flipped the table in front of them, knocking wine and food across the floor. In the same motion, he drew his sword and slammed it into the gut of the nearest Frey guard, lunging toward Robb. "Ambush!" he roared. The hall erupted in chaos. Crossbow bolts rained down. Men screamed. Northern bannermen scrambled to draw steel. Blood soaked the feast. Robb grabbed Catelyn and ducked behind a fallen bench. Joffrey blocked a bolt aimed at his chest, the wooden shaft exploding against his blade. More Freys rushed them, blades flashing. Joffrey fought like a madman, trained in the south but hardened in the north. He screamed, slashed, bled, and protected Robb with a rage he didn't know he had. "My mother sends her regards." One of the Freys shouted. Joffrey turned and stabbed him through the throat, but they were surrounded. Robb and Joffrey backed into a corner, their swords slick with blood. Catelyn clutched a dagger from the floor. A dying umber crawled toward them, whispering, "Run! Please!" Then came a voice. "Stop!" The crossbows paused. At the doors stood Arya, blade in hand, her face smeared with blood and dirt. Behind her, the hound, Sandor Clegane, burned and growling. "We're not done yet," Arya said coldly. The hound tossed a torch into the nearest tapestry. Fire leapt up the wall. Then chaos started all over again. Flames climbed the stone walls like angry ghosts. The great hall of the twins became a furnace of screams and steel. Smoke choked the air. Firelight danced on the blood-soaked floor, where kings, killers, and cowards all bled the same color. Joffrey pressed his back against Robb's, blades in both hands now. His left arm was cut, and his ribs ached from a blow he hadn't seen coming, but he kept swinging. Robb had taken a crossbow graze to the shoulder. Blood ran down his arm, soaking into the wolf-stitched leather. His eyes were locked on the balcony where Walder Frey had vanished like a spider, retreating into its web. "Get to Mother!" he shouted. Joffrey nodded, breaking from their formation. He ducked beneath a swinging blade, then drove his sword into a Frey who tried to grab Catelyn by the hair. She was on the floor, trying to pull a wounded bannerman out from under a table, tears and soot streaking her face. "Leave him!" Joffrey growled, dragging her toward the side exit. Catelyn looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time, she didn't see a lion cub raised on cruelty. She saw a boy burning, fighting for a family that wasn't his. A boy she once swore to never forgive, now protecting her like her own blood. "Go!" she shouted, pushing him forward. Meanwhile, Arya and the hound were carving a path through the side of the hall. Arya moved like a shadow, cutting throats without hesitation. The hound fought like a rabid dog, swatting men aside with brutal, bloody swings. They reached Robb, who now limped from a slash across the thigh. Still breathing. The hound grunted. "Barely," Robb hissed. "Where's Frey?" Arya pointed up. "Cowards hiding in the high tower!" Robb turned to Joffrey, who had just shoved Catelyn through a side door. "Get her out. Take my mother. Take my sister. Ride." Joffrey blinked. "I'm not leaving you." "You have to," Robb said. "You're the only one Cersei wants more than me. If she finds out you lived, she'll burn the north to the ground," Joffrey finished. They stared at each other for a long, frozen moment. Two boys who should have been enemies, now brothers by blood, battle, and betrayal. Then Robb gave him a sharp nod. "Protect my family." "That's an order." Joffrey turned, teeth clenched, and grabbed Arya by the arm. "We ride now." They fought their way out through the servant tunnels. Behind them, the twins burned. Frey screamed. Some leapt into the river to escape the fire. Others tried to hold ground and were slaughtered by angry northern survivors regrouping outside. Robb, bloodied and limping, reached the high tower. He found Walder Frey cowering behind his guards, a goblet of wine trembling in his wrinkled hand. "Well," the old man wheezed, "you lived longer than I expected." Robb's voice was a growl. "You broke guest right," Walder sneered. "You broke your word first." "I didn't lie," Robb spat. "I just chose love. Love is for fools. Alliances win wars." Robb raised his sword. "Then let this be our final alliance." He swung. When the northern men found him an hour later, Walder Frey's body hung from the tower window, throat slit, eyes wide open. Below it, the wolf banners rose again. Days later, at a cold campfire beside the neck, Joffrey sat across from Arya, both silent. He had barely spoken since the escape. His hands still shook from the fire. His nightmares had returned, but now they weren't of Cersei or Robert. They were of Robb. Arya finally broke the silence. "You fought better than I expected." Joffrey didn't respond. "You could go east," she offered. "Live free." He looked up slowly. "And leave Robb's name to be forgotten? Leave Cersei to paint him as a traitor?" He shook his head. "No, I'll go to the wall. Take the black. No thrones? No lies? Just the truth. I think—" "I need that," Arya smirked faintly. "You'd make a terrible crow. I've already worn worse colors." She chuckled once, softly, then stood. "I'm going to find Sansa, and then maybe I'll make a list of people who still need to die." Joffrey stared into the flames. "Start with my mother." Months passed. Catelyn returned to Winterfell, grieving yet proud. Sansa was found near salt pans. Arya disappeared again, chasing whispers on the wind. Robb was buried beneath the heart tree, and at Castle Black a boy arrived with no name, no crown, no gold, only a black cloak and a single truth. He had once been Joffrey Baratheon. Now he was just a brother in black, guarding the realm far from fire and thrones. And for the first time in his life, he felt free.